Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Billy Watson TV. It gives me great pleasure today to have a returning guest on. He's been on quite 3 or 4 times now. I'm losing track, but it's always an honour and a pleasure to have Andrew Kaufman on, and welcome you to the show again, Andrew. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Billy. Thank you for having me back.
That's good. You're looking very well, and is this the result of what we're going to talk about? Because I'm very interested to see you've been getting into the way of water recently. You're moving off of viruses for a time. I'm sure you're quite relieved about that, and I'm quite glad to talk to you about something else. So what is this thing about the way of water? You've got a workshop coming up. What's this all about?
Well, Billy, since I first started studying natural healing about 4 or 5 years ago, I recognized this problem that people are generally not drinking enough water, and that we've misinterpreted actually the cues of thirst because we think that signs of dehydration are actually thirst, and we miss the thirst that comes before that. And I didn't realize how much of a problem it was until I did my own water fast in March, where I did an extended 26-day water fast. And
What made
this
you do that?
really, well, I'm in the habit of looking into different types of procedures that are, my preference is that they're nature-based, that have been reported to result in, major healing from significant life-threatening illnesses like cancer and autoimmune disease and multiple sclerosis and things like that.
So having worked
So
in the medical establishment, you're quite aware of all the toxics involved in there. So you're now focusing on the natural stuff and looking into all
absolutely.
that stuff.
Yeah, well, at this point, I've completely left organized medicine. I let my license expire. I no longer work in that. I mean, once I really learned that the pharmaceuticals that I was required to prescribe to work in that system were essentially poison, I couldn't keep, giving poison to people. And I was working with adolescents at the time. So what I did is I essentially changed my practice to get them off, taper everyone off the poisons. But that was, only part of the struggle. Like, that was just reducing harm. So once I learned that through simple things like nutrition and cleansing, that people can have major recoveries, I began studying that, in earnest. And my criteria is when I, find evidence, and this isn't always, published in a randomized controlled trial. It might be anecdotal, but when there's enough of it to take seriously, that people can really heal from serious illness. So I'm not talking about something that, makes people feel more energetic or have improved vitality. We're talking about, serious illness here, because that's the background I come from in medicine. And so I heard this about fasting. And, there's actually, it's something that is ubiquitous in nature. All animals fast when they're sick or injured. So I wanted to investigate this. And the way that I decide if I feel something is worthwhile to teach other people about is, the final step is that I do it myself
Yeah.
and observe directly what the experience is like, so that I can describe that to other people if I find out that it's worthwhile. And I think fasting is actually possibly the most powerful way of healing. And I think it can really, if it's possible to heal from any condition, I think fasting will result in that healing more likely than anything else.
Which is kind of bizarre. We always get taught, when you're ill, you go to the doctor and, you start taking the medicines and you put more toxicity. This is what the virus has certainly taught me, to be responsible for our own health. And what we put into our body has a very large effect. Because again, the cold and the flu, it's your body detoxifying from all this stuff that this lifestyle everyone's in with the processed foods and everything. So we've got all these toxins, and then the Wi-Fi and stress. But it's kind of crazy to think that water, and obviously not, the body heals itself essentially. That's what the body's an
Yes,
intelligent being, so it knows what to
absolutely.
do, and we have to just step back and give the body time to, eat. And the part of obviously eating, that's when the body goes to work, digest and stuff, and you're taking that energy away, therefore from process of actually healing.
Yes, absolutely. So that is essentially the essence of fasting. But what I also realized that fasting is, at least water fasting, because I'm not a proponent of dry fasting, is it's really giving your body water, and that water actually has a large eminent role in purifying the body and allowing it to heal. And I started learning about this over the last couple of years, but after this experience I really dove into the research, because water is not what we've been told. It's not what you learn in science, that it's just, a passive background solvent that, all of the real chemicals that do the real chemistry and work take place, right? But it's just passive there in the background, just like the air around us, right? Although that's active too, involved in our respiration, but just by itself it does nothing, supposedly, right? It just is there, and it's bouncing around in random Brownian motion or some other kind of motion. So what's been discovered, though, actually by many modern scientists, and this is even earlier in the century, we had people like Victor Schauberger and others, and people looking into primary water, who made major discoveries. And then there were a couple of false starts in looking at this, like when the that water had this capillary action property was first attributed to water itself, and then it was debunked and said to be from contamination from silicon from the glass and this kind of thing. So it was kind of shut off, that line of research. But eventually, largely due to the work of Gerald Pollack, it's now well established that water is very unique and does all these crazy things. Like it actually absorbs energy, it converts energy, and does work. It can actually you can actually take a glass of water, and just by putting a piece of plastic or some other material in there, can actually make a battery. And there's even a place where you could buy a clock that is runs on a glass of water or a vessel of water. So what we know now is just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg. But it turns out that water just plays this huge role in biology, and it helps explain many observations that we've had that have been explained by a theory that's now been disproven.
Yeah, there's a Japanese guy who does the experiments with the water, and your thought patterns. You can see the amazing evidence in front of your eyes where it's got hate. It's all muddy and murky and horrible to look at, but if you think love, it's beautiful patterns. And then we're made up as at least 70% water, our body. So that's bound to play a part in that as well.
Absolutely. So you're talking about Emoto, and his work, yes, was extremely enlightening, where he showed that you can have an effect on water through your consciousness by using a conscious intention and imparting that upon the water. You can actually change the physical properties of water, where it forms much more perfect crystals when you freeze it, compared to if you give it a negative intention. And this even was shown with a biological experiment where they put rice in a glass of water, in three separate glasses. And, every morning, do you know about this experiment, Billy?
Yeah, they just wish love to one and hate to another and indifference to the other one, kind of thing.
Yeah. They ignored the third one, right? And they, the one that was given love developed into a sweet ferment, right? That was actually edible,
Yeah.
and right, and then the other two had very different results, right? I think the one that was ignored actually was the worst, and it turned black.
Yeah, that's right.
So and you can do this experiment at home, and learn that so you're imparting your consciousness onto the water, and that's changing the properties of water, which is affecting the microorganisms that are decomposing the rice that you leave in there. So it's this illustrates the intimate relationship with the biological system. And this is just a great way of coming to the material and looking at it, and then you can get to know a little bit about what's actually happening with the water that it forms this fourth phase of matter, right? That's different from liquid, gas, or solid. It has the properties of what you could call a liquid crystal or a gel. And it's also known as easy or the exclusion zone water. And this is where all of these unique properties come from about transducing energy and being able to, perform work, and which is critical to our biological functions.
Okay, that's quite interesting. I'm not too sure. I don't know what you mean by water becoming gel, and what's this like?
Yeah.
There's a glass of water here. How does it become gel? In what state in your body? Or
Well, so this effect is observed when the water comes in contact with what's called a hydrophilic surface. So that's any kind of surface that is water loving, or it's polar enough to be soluble in water. And so it could be something that has charges on it, or polarity. So in other words, not a fat or an oil. And it turns out that all of our tissues, pretty much like our blood vessels, for example, are hydrophilic surfaces. So when the water in our blood, it goes next to these surfaces, it forms this exclusion zone. And this was kind of found out originally by accident when some researchers were just studying blood circulation. And as a model, what they did is they had a block of this gel. I think it was polyacrylamide gel. So it's similar to the material that would be making up blood vessels, but different, synthetic. And they bored holes in it that were like the blood vessels. And then they took water with electrolytes, I believe, and they put little beads in it that were supposed to be like the red blood cells that were in suspension. They call that a colloid. And when they put this suspension through the holes that were simulating blood vessels, they noticed that none of the beads went near the surface of the tunnels,
hey,
right? And it was like they were all concentrated in the middle as they flowed down. And so they called it the exclusion zone because it excluded, right, the beads. And so essentially there's like a ring around the interior, right, where there were no particles. And it turns out that they also dissolved materials like electrolytes also would migrate to the middle and stay away from the surface in this exclusion zone. And that was, the initial kind of discovery of this. And, there have been many, many more experiments that have shown that at that exclusion zone is where the water takes on these different properties.
it's pretty amazing stuff. And
Yes, it is.
yeah, also just when you're talking about water as well, somebody once told me about the pyramids in Egypt, and they said that they were all built to kind of a big special thing for making water magical. I can't remember the exact process, but I think there's a lot more obviously to water than what's generally we think of. And like people get
Absolutely.
the tap water and we drink tea and coffee, and they think that's how they're getting their water supply. But I was actually drinking quite a lot of tea just before the lockdown, and then I got talking to Don and David, and they mentioned distilled water, so I bought a distiller, and I stopped drinking tea because I was having really bad urine problems, pain and stuff in there, and I've not had it since because I believe even tea and water, sorry, the caffeine dehydrates us as well. So you're saying a lot of people are going around dehydrated because they're probably drinking tea and alcohol and stuff like that. How does that affect people? And does that lead to longer, deeper illnesses, just the dehydration? And how do you know you're hydrated? You don't just drink a pint of water and then leave it for 4 or 5 hours. It's about consistency. And what's the body doing to that water? Just having small drips in rather than one big jug.
Right. Well, there are a lot of questions in there, and I'm definitely, that's all the kind of material that I'm going to cover at this workshop in more detail and in more practical terms. But you've hit on some really good issues. So, and when you take a beverage other than pure water, like coffee or tea, it's not just the diuretic effects of the caffeine. And those, it depends on the amount. So if it's just 1 cup or 2 cups, probably it's not enough caffeine to dehydrate you through the diuresis. But if you're drinking all day, or if you're substituting those for pure water, then it's not gonna work in your favor for sure. But there's another problem with those, which is that they have lots of chemicals, from the plant itself that don't necessarily have a good effect on your body. For example, when you drink a lot of coffee, right, it makes you go to the bathroom, like defecate, not just it makes you pee. And that's because it's essentially, somewhat toxic to your gut, and it's causing it to cleanse to get rid of it. And it might get rid of some other stuff. This can be used, therapeutically sometimes, like with coffee enemas. But especially if you're getting or tea or coffee that are not organic, they have, some of the highest use of pesticides of any, plant material. So in addition to getting the possible loss of water, you're also getting exposed to these other toxins. And that's part of the problem with drinking those things. So it's best to keep that in moderation and drink mostly pure water, or exclusively if possible.